Hare Krishna, welcome. Welcome everybody. Today we are going to complete chapter 13, starting from sloka 13.27. So before we begin, I'll say the prayers to Guru and God and then I'll play the Guru mantra. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalake Chakshurumilitamene Tasmai Shri Guru Namaha.
गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुर्साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरुवे नमः। तस्मै श्री गुरुवे नमः। तस्मै श्री गुरुवे नमः।
Okay, I'll play the slokas.
यावत् सञ्जायते किञ्चित् सत्त्वं स्थावरजङ्गमम् क्षेत्रक्षेत्रज्ञसंयोगात् तद्विद्धि भरतर्षभ समं सर्वेषु भूतेषु तिष्ठन्तं परमेश्वरम् विनश्यत्स्व विनश्यन्तं यः पश्यति स पश्यति समं पश्यन् हि सर्वत्र समवस्थितमीश्वरम् न हि नस्त्यात्मनात्मानं ततो याति परां गतिम् प्रकृत्यैव च कर्माणि क्रियमाणानि सर्वशः यः पश्यति तथात्मानमकर्तारं स पश्यति यदा भूतपृथग्भावमेकस्थमनुपश्यति तत एव च विस्तारं ब्रह्म सम्पद्यते तदा अनादित्वान् निर्गुणत्वात् परमात्मायमव्ययः शरीरस्थोऽपि कौन्तेय न करोति न लिप्यते यथा सर्वगतं सौक्ष्म्यादाकाशं नोपलिप्यते सर्वत्रावस्थितो देहे तथात्मानोपलिप्यते यथा प्रकाशयत्येकः कृत्स्नं लोकमिमं रविः क्षेत्रं क्षेत्री तथा कृत्स्नं प्रकाशयति भारत क्षेत्रक्षेत्रज्ञयोरेवमन्तरं ज्ञानचक्षुषा भूतप्रकृतिमोक्षं च ये विदुर्यान्ति ते परम् ॐ तत्सदिति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे क्षेत्रक्षेत्रज्ञविभागयोगो नाम त्रयोदशोऽध्यायः.
So verse 13.27, know that whatever comes into being, whether immovable or moving, is produced by the union of Kṣetra, the field, and Kṣetrajña, the knower of the field. 13.28, they alone see truly who perceive the Paramatma, Supreme Lord, accompanying the individual soul in all beings, and who understand both to be imperishable amidst everything that is perishable, including the body that they reside in. 13.29, one who sees the Supreme Lord equally present everywhere and in all living beings does not harm the self by the self and attains the supreme destination. 13.30, they alone truly see who see that all actions are done by Prakriti alone and that the self is actionless. 13.31, when one sees the diverse variety of beings as inherent in the One and their expansion from that alone, they then become Brahman. 13.32, being imperishable, beginningless, and beyond qualities, the Supreme Self though residing in the body, neither acts nor is tainted, O son of Kunti. 13.33 Just as space, which is subtle, is not tainted, though all pervading and holding everything, so too the self, pervading the whole body, is not tainted. 13.34 Just as the one sun illuminates the entire world, so does the knower of the field illuminate the entire field, O descendant of Bharata. 13.35 Those who, through the eye of knowledge, understand the distinction between the field and the knower of the field and the process of liberation from the material nature, attain the supreme. Hare Krishna.
So Hare Krishna, welcome everybody. This is the concluding session of chapter 13, and in these verses, Krishna is going deeper into the concept of Prakriti, Purusha, and how they interact with each other. It's a very important concept, and he's using a term called Yavat Sanjayate, which means whatever is born, and then he also uses the term Stavara Jangama, which means that which is moving as well as not moving, or that which is stationary as well as which is mobile. So by using the term that which is moving as well as not moving, it is kind of talking about everything. That is a very poetic, beautiful way of saying everything. But what is more important to kind of understand is why is he using the word Sanjayate? Because he's not just saying that everything that is created, he's saying everything that is born. So there is a kind of beautiful meaning attached to born here in this context, because when you say something is born, we are not talking about just a one-time activity. When we say something is born, we are talking about a flow. It's a flow of creation. We think we die, but then that is just another aspect which is going to again culminate in a birth. So this birth, death is a cycle. Cycle implies it's a flow. So that's one of the things he wants to bring about. So the beautiful aspect is when we called Purusha as the never-changing, eternal, and we call Prakriti as the ever-changing, Asat. But then when the ever-changing and never-changing, when they cooperate and when they come together, that is when this magic of the manifested universe happens. That is the whole concept Krishna is trying to explain. So just as an analogy, you can think of a seed and soil. Just a seed cannot become a tree. Just like that, just a soil cannot create a tree. A healthy seed has to have a cooperation and some kind of a union with fertile soil. And when they come together, then you can have a big tree, a healthy, big, strong tree. So that is kind of the analogy, that is kind of the concept that Krishna is explaining, that Purusha and that Prakriti, just Purusha, there is no manifestation. Just Prakriti, again, there is no magic. But that Purusha and Prakriti, how they work together. That is the whole aspect. And in Vedic cosmology, the same thing has been explained, and they have used 3 different stages or 3 different terms for this. One is Srishti. Srishti talks about creation. And then the second is Sthiti. Sthiti means sustenance or preservation. And the third is Laya, or it's also called Pralaya, which is dissolution and reabsorption. So as you all know, Srishti means that is when the universe is created and manifested. And in Sthiti, the sustenance happens based on Niyati and all of those concepts we already studied. And then during Pralaya, this everything dissolves and merges back with the Supreme, the Purusha. And even in the various Vedic texts, you can see the same concept repeating many times, And there is a Upanishad called Taittiriya Upanishad. And there also it is beautifully called out. Yato va imani bhutani jayante yena jatani jivanti yat prayantya bisam vishanti tad brahma tad vijijasasva. Which means that from which these beings are born, by which once born they live, and into which they merge back when they cease to be. Seek to know that. That is Brahman. So this Taittiriya Upanishad just covered the three stages. It covered Srishti, Sthiti, and Laya, where it said that from which things are born, that is the Srishti. And then once born, they live. That live is the Sthiti. And then when they cease to be, they merge back. That is the Laya. And that is the flow. You see, it's a flow. It's a constant flow. That is why Krishna uses the word Sanjayate. He uses the word born when he talks about anything in this material manifested universe. And Krishna is also emphasizing, he's saying, whether they are sthavar, which means stationary, or jangam, which means mobile, they all owe their existence to this union between Purusha and Prakriti. So it doesn't matter. It can be a mountain, it can be a river, it can be a plant, animal, They are all products. They are all products of this eternal process. Even a smallest particle of dust, if you take, it is a manifestation. Even that is a result of that union of Purusha and Prakriti. That is the concept. Very beautiful concept. And see, in other words, neither Purusha nor Prakriti independently create this manifested universe. It is an interplay, union. It's like two sides of the same coin. So this is, very, very important. One of the reasons why this is so important is, if you look at our culture, the Vedic culture, this is one of the reasons why we show respect to rivers, we show respect to earth, we show respect to mountains. Everything is respected because this is the deep concept. The deep concept is, even a speck of dust, there is Purusha in it. You cannot find anything where there is no aspect of Purusha. You cannot say something is just material and everything is a union of these two. That is why when we address the earth also, we will say she, Mother Earth. We call it as Mother Earth. So we personify everything. So it's a very, very beautiful, deep concept in our Vedic culture. This is the whole science behind that. Because Krishna himself said, I permeate everything. I permeate. I'm everywhere. Every atom has me, right? So how can anything not have the Purusha in it? So that is the whole concept of why in our culture we have this respect. This is not understood by the Western philosophy, but this is our Vedic philosophy, which is very, very profound. And so again, we come back to this word Sanjayate, where Krishna spoke about everything is born based on the union of Purusha and Prakriti. But what is the problem? The problem is avidya, ignorance. Because there is this ignorance, the soul thinks the body, it is the body. Because the reality is, it is an interplay of Purusha and Prakriti, and eventually when you say liberation, you are going to get away from this cycle and you want to totally merge in the Purusha. That is what we want. That is the ultimate, destination for all of us. However, this soul is clouded or covered by this ignorance, avidya, because of which it thinks it is the body. False identification. And what happens when there is this false identification? What happens when the soul identifies with the body? See, because what the body is not? The body is not Purusha. The body is not the supreme. Correct? But if the soul is identifying with the body, then what happens? Then the soul thinks it is not that. So when the soul thinks it is not that, that is what is the definition of separation. There is a sense of separation because now it is identifying with that which is not that. And this is the cause of all the pain that the soul experiences. So far making sense? If there is any doubt, you can always ask me. Yes, Ekansh?
So the Purusha is the living element and the Prakriti is the non-living element?
So we don't use the term living and non-living here. We just use the terms the energy. So Prakriti also has a energy aspect to it, where we call it as para Prakriti and apara Prakriti, where Purusha is the pure energy, the absolute pure energy. And we are just saying that they have an interplay where they have different aspects, where Purusha is the absolute never changing aspect. That energy is what is Purusha. Whereas that which is ever changing, always changing, that energy we call it as Prakriti. Okay, and we are saying our soul has to identify with the Purusha. Eventually, it has to understand that it is that which is just coexisting and cooperating with this Prakriti, but it is not Prakriti. It is not the body. You see, that is the realization we have to eventually come to. As long as we don't get that realization, we get bewildered by all this change. We get bewildered by the apparent death, of things and all of that. Janam, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. It bewilders and pains the soul.
So Guruji, is Krishna just Purusha or he is both?
See, the Brahman is Purusha. Okay? But then when Krishna has to teach lessons to us, he also takes a birth, right? Because he has to come to us in a form that we can understand. You see, so when you say Krishna, what are you talking about is the question. If you are saying Krishna means that boy in that village, in that body, then you are not talking about absolute Purusha. But when we say Krishna, we have supposed to understand that Krishna is actually that Purusha, but he took a limited form for the benefit of humanity. Because you and I cannot talk to spirit, right? Not yet. So we need a human with whom we can talk. A human has to talk to us. So he took that limited form. Just like in the Vishwarupa Darshanam, he was showing such a incomprehensible form that eventually Arjuna got bewildered and he said, Krishna, I want to see you back in that limited form that I am comfortable with. So for the sake of Arjuna, Krishna comes back to that limited form. Just like that, he is taking that limited form for us. That is something we have to understand. But he is not that body. See, he is Purusha eventually. That is the whole concept. So this Krishna's teachings here, they make it very clear that true knowledge.
Guruji, I had a question. So,
can you? Okay.
You want me to hold it till the end? That's fine. Yeah.
No, that's okay. But maybe I didn't see your hand. So go ahead.
Yeah. So can we say that Purusha is like the life force and everything that is governed by the life force is Prakriti?
See, I want to be careful not to introduce too many terms here.
Yeah.
So I think let us stick to the definition that Purusha means it is the root. It is the never changing absolute truth. And everything else we can call it in many different words, and we can say that they are all anything that is manifested. We can say that they are all the interplay of Purusha and Prakriti. That absolute Purusha is not something that you can define. That absolute Purusha is not something that you can point and say this is Purusha. That is a whole challenge. So yes, there is a life force, but I don't want to use terms because they will start getting very confusing eventually. Then we will have too many such terms. Yeah, Ekansh?
Yes, Guruji. Guruji, can we all say it like Prakriti is limited?
In what way?
So, in like Prakriti, what I understood from your explanation is Purusha is the absolute energy that is all pervasive and that is higher than everything. It is like pure knowledge and it is absolute, but the Prakriti is the limited form that is present on this earth, which makes us different from the Purusha. which gives us a sense of difference with the Purusha.
Yeah, so let's be careful. It doesn't make us different from Purusha. It is our own ego, our own ahankar, which gives us this illusion that we are separate from that Purusha. But when you say, am I separate? What is that I? So
Ahankar.
if you say I means this person with this beard and this hand and leg, then yes, then you are separate from Purusha. But if you can say I means that soul, then you are not separate, because that soul is a part of that Purusha only, you see?
Yeah.
And it is not, and Prakriti means we are not talking just about earth. Anything in this universe, the manifested universe, it is all Prakriti. And that's why I want to be careful, like what term we use for what, because the universe itself is infinite. So when you say is Prakriti limited, then we will get into that argument that says, well, but if the universe is infinite, that means is the universe unlimited, and then is Prakriti limited, unlimited? So that is why, very carefully, even Krishna used the term saying anything that is moving or not moving, and that kind of interacts with that Purusha, and that Purusha is that absolute Sat. Yeah. So if you can like, my request and my advice is, try to just focus on what we are not. That way it will be easier to then realize what we are. Okay, because it is very hard to understand what we are, because that is not something we can define. In the previous sessions, that is where we used the example. We said, if I present something which is absolutely transparent and ask you, what is the color? You said it is colorless. That is the best explanation we could give. We could only say what it is not. Correct? Just like that, what we need to understand is anything that changes, we are not that. If it is changing, then we are not that. You see? That way, eventually you'll be able to understand that you are something which is never changing, something which is absolute. But if you try to define that, if you try to define what am I, it's very hard, because it is beyond comprehension. So the approach that we are trying to take here is, anything that you can define, anything that you can comprehend, anything that you can perceive, one by one, understand that you are not that. So that eventually you can figure out that you are that which is not, something beyond our comprehension. You see, that is the whole message here. Hope it is making sense. And this is where Jnana comes into play. So this is what Krishna had said. This Jnana is important. This is real knowledge. The knowledge that helps us eventually comprehend and eventually understand and realize what we truly are and what we are not. If you don't have this knowledge, then we are always going to identify with things that we are not truly, what we truly are not. And that is the cause of pain and suffering. So now, but this Jnana, or this kind of understanding, if you have to really have that knowledge and understand the difference between Kṣetra and Kṣetrajña, which is the field and the knower of the field, how can we get there? How can we have that kind of a Jnana? That's possible only if we are in a mindset of surrender, correct? Only when we are in a mindset of humility. This is what Krishna said. Krishna said that real knowledge, it will illuminate us only when we are ready, only when we are in that mindset of surrender, only when we are in that mindset of. And why is that important? Because when we are having that ego, it is that ego only which is giving you the wrong illusion. Na? See, the problem is very simple. We don't understand or we don't perceive that we are that absolute. Why? Because of ego. It is that ego which is binding the soul to this body. It is that ego and ahankar which is giving the soul this false identification
that we are something which we are not. So then, but if you have to realize what we truly are, then you have to first handle the problem, na? And the problem is ego. So this is very simple. This is as simple as that. That is why Krishna says the real knowledge will illuminate us only when we have handled our ego, only when we have handled our pride. That is why in the past few months, I have been very, very hard on this. I've been beating the same point again and again, saying no pride, no ego, because at the bottom, it is as simple as that. We cannot have both. It is impossible. We cannot say that I'll hold on to my precious pride and ego, and also I will realize God, it's not going to work. So that takes us to Pragma 12, where Pragma 12 says, abandon ego and approach knowledge with humility, because knowing God is possible only then. That is the only way you can realize God. Or if I have to explain it differently, we are already a part of God only. We are not separate. But it is this ego which is creating that illusion of separation. So if you don't want that illusion of separation, then you have to get rid of that ego. Because it is that ego only which is, giving us that sense of separation, correct? So that is what Krishna says. Now that will make more sense. Pariprashnena, pranipatena, sevaya. That will make more sense now. See, this is the whole idea. So humility, it allows the seeker to recognize what? First, it allows us to recognize that we are not the doer. In other words, all actions, all manifestations, the foundational truth is they are all based on this interaction of Purusha and Prakriti. Forces much, much bigger than us. And so this we means this body is definitely not the doer, because there are forces much bigger. The second thing we can understand once we handle our ego is all of creation is divine. Everything, even insignificant things that we think which are insignificant, they are the expression of the same divine principle. They are the expression of the same union of the same Purusha and Prakriti. That is why then we will have the reverence and respect for everything around us. And the third, we will realize that this journey requires surrender. That is why it requires surrender. Because once we let go of ego, then we align with the truth. Ego is the falsehood. We cannot keep holding on to ego. It is like saying, I want to float, but then you have this 100-kilo stone tied around your waist. You're like, I'm not going to let go of that stone, but I still want to float. You have to make a choice. You either float or you give up that stone. You cannot have both. Just like that, you either realize the truth or you hold on to that which is not true. You cannot hold on to that which is not true and expect to realize truth. And ego is not the truth. That is why surrender is a recurring concept throughout our Vedanta. And Krishna is revealing, he is saying that seeing the same Brahman, which is the Supreme Soul, equally present in all beings, also the side effect of that, if you can see that and realize that, naturally you will be able to practice ahimsa. The ahimsa happens, hinsa happens when there is this illusion of separation, where you think you are hurting somebody else. But once we have this realization that everybody is the same, everybody is the result of the same union of the same Purusha and Prakriti, and Krishna is in everybody, once that becomes a reality, then ahimsa will come naturally. That is the whole idea here. It's a very profound realization that the Brahman, the Purusha, that is equally residing. What Krishna is saying is even more beautiful. Krishna is saying, forget harming somebody else. Krishna says, once we have this realization, we will at least stop harming ourselves. Because a lot of us are in a self-sabotage mode. We are harming ourselves. We are letting our own minds harm our own self. Our own minds are tormenting us endlessly. And Krishna is saying, if you get this realization that you are also divine, you are also a spark of that same union of Purusha and Prakriti, you are also a tiny part of me, then we will stop harming our own self also. A very, very beautiful, empowering lesson that Krishna says, and that brings us to the next Pragma 13, that says, know that God exists in everyone, so harm no one. And I will add to that, know that God exists in you also, so don't harm yourself. No, it is pointless. Okay. So this teaching, what happens, is very powerful, this teaching. The powerful aspect is that this understanding and realization, it will transform ahimsa from a passive avoidance to an active expression of love and respect for all beings. So ahimsa should not just be theory, and ahimsa should not just be, I'm just avoiding harming somebody. I'm just holding my own hands tight. Okay, I'm not harming anybody. That is not yet the true ahimsa. Because true ahimsa means you are full of compassion. You're full of empathy for all, for everything, including your own self. That's a very, very empowering. Isn't it empowering? That is why ahimsa is a virtue as per Sanatana Dharma, because it is a very empowering concept. And then Krishna touches upon this profound topic of the mind, the intellect, and liberation. Earlier, Krishna spoke in the 6th chapter, where he said that for him who has conquered the mind, 6.6, very, very profound sloka. You should try and read that again. There Krishna said, for him who has conquered the mind is the best friend. And for him who has failed, the mind will become the greatest enemy. Very powerful. Krishna already said that. And then in the 3rd chapter, 3.42, Krishna spoke about the importance of mastering the mind. Where Krishna said that if the mind is not kept under check, it will drag us towards material desires. So you should check that also. This is 3.42. Please read that when you get time, where Krishna said that the senses are superior to the body. And he said the mind is superior to the senses. And the intellect is superior to the mind. And the self is superior to the intellect. So he created that hierarchy, where at the gross level, the body is at the bottom. And then on top of that, you have the senses. Correct? On top of the sense, you had the mind. On top of the mind, you had the intellect. And on the topmost was the self. So basically, the intellect should be guiding the mind. That is the whole idea. And the intellect itself has to be purified, and the self has to govern the intellect. But then for this hierarchy to function, what is important? What is important is the intellect has to be, filled with real divine knowledge, Jnana, the right knowledge. Because as long as the intellect is not trained that way, it will never get the mind under control. It will in fact be instigating the mind. We discussed an example also earlier. We said it is the intellect that makes a conclusion that money is the most important thing, for example. And then all the life, it is the mind that will keep dragging you towards wealth, towards money. The mind is just following what the intellect said. The conclusion was made by the intellect. But if the intellect has to now make the right conclusion, then it has to have the right jnana. That is the whole point. So this is why Krishna has always Krishna explained there itself in 3.42 that when empowered by this kind of real knowledge, the intellect can then restrain the mind successfully. And once that happens, automatically the mind will take us towards liberation. So that is why Krishna has emphasized the importance of discipline also, spiritual discipline, consistency, conviction, always choosing Shreya over Preya. All of these things are in that direction. Okay, see, remember, it is like, these are all like forces. If you cannot say that, one day I'm doing something good and then for the next 5 days I'm going to take a break, because then the energy is energy. Things will start working. It's going to be like a game that you cannot win if we are not consistent. We have to consistently make progress, because the mind will seek pleasure. That is the nature of the mind. The nature of the mind is to always seek pleasure. So because of that, it is always going to drag us towards pleasures. And then, but if we follow that mind in its natural sense, then we are going to keep falling lower and lower and lower and lower. And it's a spiral. But if the intellect is sharp, if the intellect is purified, then it will make sure that the mind doesn't drag us that way. Very, very important. You see this, I like to again bring you back to that image, the world famous image of Krishna sitting on the chariot. Visualize that, no? Visualize that Krishna is sitting on the chariot, and the chariot is drawn by these 5 strong, powerful horses. And what does Krishna have in his hand? The reins. Correct? Now, in this analogy, those 5 horses are the 5 senses. They are very strong, very powerful. Imagine if the horses got a free, they can do what they want. Imagine they can run faster than anybody can, catch up with. But they will be running in all different directions. You will never reach where you want to reach, because they are very powerful horses and they are running wildly. But Krishna knows where the horses have to go. Let us not say Krishna, let us just say charioteer, because that way it is easier for me to explain the imperfection. The charioteer knows where the horses have to go. So that charioteer becomes the intellect. But how is the charioteer going to control the horses? That is using the reins. So that rein is the mind. Now see the connection, how it works. So if the intellect is not, sharp enough, then the charioteer, he doesn't know how to use the reins, then he is going to be, directing the horses in all the wrong direction. Correct? So all of this have to fall into place. I hope that makes sense. So that is why it is very, very important. Can you say that for some time, let the horse go wherever it wants to go, and then sometimes I will tell the horse what is the right direction to go? Is it even making sense? Like you are fighting a battle. It's a very powerful battle. You are fighting very powerful enemies, and you as a charioteer are going to tell, okay, horses, I'll give you a break for a few hours. Go wherever you want. And then when at some time I'm going to say, okay, now for the next 3 hours, you will go where I want you to go. And then again, I'm like, okay, now you go wherever you want to go. Does it even make sense? It feels so funny, right? But that is what we are doing to ourselves when we are not consistent, because those horses have to always be kept under check. Those horses always have to be directed what is the right way to go. There is no break. Consistency is the key. It's okay if the horses are going a little slower, but as long as they are going in the right direction, you're okay. That is the whole idea of consistency and conviction. This will all make sense. You have to just go through it a few times and it will make sense. Sulataji, yes?
Yeah, Guruji, you had told us about this tying ourselves to the yoke of God consciousness. So when we tie ourselves, our mind might wander a little distance, but it will again realize that it has been tied and we have to come back.
Exactly.
So it will not go far off. Yeah.
Beautiful. Somebody else was asking me this question the other day. They were saying, my mind, it is all the time. It was a very young person. I was trying to counsel that person. Someone who looks up to me and all. So very, 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 very super sharp, super brilliant person. That person is probably more intelligent than me. very young. But they came to me and they were having this discussion with me saying, I've heard that you are preaching about Krishna's teachings and all. But what doesn't make sense is, I try, many times I tell my mind that you cannot focus on the negative things, you cannot focus on those vikaras, you cannot focus on those bad habits or whatever. And he says, but every time I'm really trying, but it is getting more and more difficult for me. He says at some point I feel like I'm going to go mad because, and that is the nature. And this is where the key lesson that we have to remember is you cannot control the mind. In other words, you cannot oppose. If the mind is saying, I'm giving very innocent examples, but it can apply to real examples. Whatever cravings you have, that the mind is, it applies to that also. So the mind may just say, gulab jam, or mind may say, chocolates. The mind will pull you because it seeks that pleasure. But now, if you keep telling the mind no, you cannot. See, that will help one day, that may help like 1 week, but it gets very tiring. You cannot outperform the mind. The mind can tirelessly keep pulling you, but you will get tired eventually and you will give in. So that is where Krishna gave the beautiful lesson of substitution. So don't try to control, brute force the mind. It's not going to work. Try substitution. So for example, if the mind is, wanting you to run behind a chocolate, train the mind and say that, okay, let us instead consume some sattvic food that we are preparing as prasad for the God. You can use any example that you like. I'm just giving a example. Just like that, if the mind is always wanting you to talk, there are some people who cannot stop talking. They may not make sense and they don't care. They just want to make themselves heard. It has to be all the time, blah, 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 blah. But if that is how your mind is, you cannot say, no, zip up. You cannot say, no, I'm not going to talk. It's not going to work. But then you can tell the mind substitution again. If you have to say something, why don't you say the name of God, or why don't you say some stories of God? Why don't you sing the glories of God? So on and so forth. So that is the key. That is the key to. So that is why we say, direct the mind rather than saying control the mind. Smita ji, you had a question?
Guruji, here can the intellect not guide the mind?
That is what we are saying. So the intellect is what has to tell the mind that instead of substitute. Exactly. Thank you. So this whole concept of substitution is a function of the intellect. It has to now help the mind, substitute the preya with shreya. Some people, they cannot avoid alcohol. Some people cannot avoid tobacco. Some people cannot avoid some kind of food. There are so many different things the mind will run. It is hard if you are trying to just hold it back. It is the right way to do it is always by substitution. I think Kṣetraji, her famous, which is your famous example, Kṣetraji, about the mind?
Which one, Guruji? I cannot remember.
Monkey.
Is it about the monkey? Yeah.
So there was this example we said where, Guruji told a person, you should meditate, but don't think of a monkey. And within a few minutes, he comes back and says, no, all I can see is think of is monkey. So that's because that is how the mind works. It's a rebel. So instead of saying, I will not think of a monkey, you have to say, okay, I will think of Krishna, or I'll think of, Narayana, or whatever appeals to you. That is the whole concept here. So that is why we again spoke about the hierarchy of control. So we have to understand how this works. And later on, maybe I can go into deep. Some youngsters have asked me questions like, what is the purpose of mind? Why do we even need a mind? If intellect is superior, or direct connection kyun nahi hai between the intellect and senses and all of that. So those are all very deep topics. But in short, everything has a purpose. For example, when you see somebody, you feel love in your heart. That is a function of the mind. The intellect cannot feel love. You know, that is the purpose of a mind. So everything has a purpose. Everything is very beautifully structured, but we just have to understand, how they all have to be directed towards that ultimate goal and not being misused. That's the whole idea. So again, the untrained mind will always cause suffering, no exception. Whereas a disciplined mind becomes a powerful tool that will take us towards enlightenment. Keep this in mind. This is a funny way of saying this. Keep this in mind, that it is the mind which is going to help you go towards liberation. The intellect will only make a conclusion. The intellect will only say that is the right direction to go. It is the mind which is going to constantly take you there. So mind has its role. That is why we say, let the intellect direct the mind and then the mind do the job. For example, the reins cannot take you anywhere. It has to be a combination of the charioteer and the reins and the horse. Together they will take you where you want to go. Alone they cannot. You see, that is a whole powerful message here. So maybe now you can make the connection between intellect and mind and liberation. You see where we are going? Because if liberation is the goal, the intellect has to be convinced. For the intellect to be convinced, you need the right jnana. For right jnana, you need the right kind of surrender without ego. And once the intellect is convinced, and once you have got the jnana through pariprashna and pranipatena and sevaya, then the intellect can direct the mind on what is the right direction. And once you do that, the mind will do the job. The mind will, see the words like motivation, or they are a function of the mind. The intellect, it doesn't create motivation. Intellect just creates a picture saying what is good for you. And once the intellect convinces the mind what is good for you, the mind does the whole motivation thing and, making you follow that path. Okay. So, we spoke about how the soul identifies with the body. That part we already spoke. How the knowledge is, jnana is important, because ultimately it's a jnana that is going to help us understand this whole game of Maya and understand that, although there are many bodies, the ultimate reality is the soul. So all that I think we have already covered. And then Krishna again speaks about Kṣetrajña and the key to liberation, where Krishna says the Atman is eternal, it is unaffected. So he uses the very beautiful analogy of space. We discussed that again in the previous, like the sky. We said the sky is, all pervading. The sky is pretty much the earth. We can say is contained by the sky, but can you ever pollute the sky? You cannot. You can pollute the air, but you cannot pollute the sky. The sky is always unaffected. So Krishna is using the same example by saying, just like that, the soul is all pervading, but it is not tainted. You cannot taint it. And the central theme here is the distinction between Kṣetra and Kṣetrajña. From this perspective, the perspective is Kṣetra means the material nature, where everything is temporary, where everything is changing, where it is all creation of the illusion. And Kṣetrajña is the knower of the field. So that is the Purusha aspect, where it says that, which is the Sat. But then the Kṣetra and Kṣetrajña, they work together to create this whole manifested magic that we see all around us. This is pretty much the crux. And then Krishna completes the chapter with 13.35, where he is talking about Kṣetrajña again. He says, Kṣetrajñayor evam antaram jnana chakshusa bhuta prakriti moksham cha e vidur yante te param. He says, those who with the eye of knowledge perceive the distinction between field and its knower and understand liberation from the modes of nature, they attain the supreme. So, jnana chakshu, that means the eye of knowledge. This is what is enabling us to discern this difference between Kṣetra and Kṣetrajña. So, in other words, if you have to see the one in the many, and if you have to see the changeless in the changing, so this is making sense? So you have to see the one, Krishna, in many, and we have to see that Purusha in Prakriti, which means you have to see that never changing in the ever changing. If we can, then we are in alignment with the divine order. So, because then this realization will transform. It will transform not just one individual soul. This is going to help transform the entire society. Because we are going to then foster qualities like equality and compassion and peace. Naturally, it will come. And as Sri Krishna himself is revealing, this is not an abstract idea, but it's a very practical guide for liberation. And so, in other words, this knowledge of this chapter helps us bridge the samsara, which is the worldly existence, with that paramartha, the ultimate reality. Okay, so what I've done, it was a little technical, I understand, but I've tried my best to simplify it while at the same time not missing out the key aspects. And so I have tried to come up with some practical takeaways that I thought I can spend a couple of minutes to quickly go through. Some practical aspects of all this we have learned in the 13th chapter. There may be more. If you can find something more than what I am saying, I will be more than happy. Please maybe send it in the team, our Telegram group. You can send it there. And I would love to hear from each one of you on what your understanding is. So in my opinion, here are some key takeaways. The first one is we have to understand our true self. In other words, recognize that the body, mind, senses, they are all part of the Kṣetra, which is a field. Whereas the Kṣetrajña is our ultimate, the eternal self. In other words, we are not our thoughts. We think. See, we always say that, I am a thought. We always say, I am thinking. So you are not the thought. Correct? Just like that, you are not the body because you say it is my body. Right? So what are we? We are that pure consciousness. So that is an understanding. What is the practical application? What can we do in this regards? We can practice self-awareness through meditation, mindfulness. In other words, don't get too attached. This over-identification, like for example, I am an engineer, I am a manager, I am a doctor, you are not a doctor, you are not an engineer. You are playing the role of a doctor, you are playing the role of an engineer, you are playing the role of something, but you are not that. So we shouldn't get too attached. That identity, that makes it more difficult for us to then actually realize the truth because we are so, hung up on these associations, identifications. Second, seeing unity in diversity that we just discussed, understanding that, even a speck of dust is a result of that union of Purusha and Prakriti. So that will automatically help us. It doesn't have to be a law that a government has to impose on us. It will come from within. Automatically it will come. So treat everyone with kindness, treat everyone with respect. And that is why we discussed, and Krishna also told us earlier, that avoid judgment. Don't be judgmental. Have discernment, but definitely no judgment. Being judgmental is a very reactive act, whereas discernment is a very proactive, empowering act. And then compassion, of course. The third takeaway, I would say, is embracing humility. Humility and non-egoistic behavior. I cannot emphasize this more. This is probably the foundation. If we cannot do that, then everything else just becomes theory. Because that ego is what is creating this illusion. Ego is what is binding us to that falsehood. So we have to really get a handle on that. And approaching life with humility, that will open the door to real jnana, real wisdom. Some practical applications. Can we let go of the need to always be right? Can we let go of the need to somehow feel superior? These are practical applications. If we can catch ourselves, whenever we are having a discussion, if you are self-aware, you will realize that unknowingly or knowingly, we have this inclination to be right. So if you can maybe handle that, just like that, knowingly or unknowingly, we always, sometimes or all the time, depending on our level of consciousness, we somehow feel we are like a snowflake. Somehow we are special. Even when people are beginning on the path of Bhakti Yoga, many times I've, in my previous groups also, I've seen people will really proudly come and say, I'm very special. I feel that, I'm very special because it's okay. It's good to feel that way, but eventually we need to get away from that because that also binds us to this ego. That's a function of the ego. That is a practical application. If you remember one of the pragmas, always focus on the problem, not the person. You should say that stealing is a problem, but don't judge somebody as a thief. I'm giving an example. Just like that, not being truthful is a problem, but never judge and say that somebody is a liar. See, this is the difference. But if you can practice this, that is a practical takeaway. That is how you can embrace true humility and compassion. And then the fourth takeaway is non-attachment, vairagyam. If you remember in the previous session, we spoke about kaivalyam. It's all related. Because we just studied, we just saw how everything, the Kṣetra is transient, the Kṣetra is ever changing. What is the practical application? One of the most beautiful phrases that I always use, and I have helped some younger friends in the past, is when you think you are going through a challenging period, just say, even this will pass. It will pass. But nothing is permanent. That is absolute truth. Nothing is permanent. That includes good times as well as bad times. So today, if everything is going well for you, today you are well to do, today you have wealth and you have health, don't jump around, because tell yourself, even this will pass. That is the truth. That will keep us grounded. That will also help us practice vairagyam. That is what is non-attachment. And celebrate achievements. That's fine. But don't let achievements bloat your ego. And similarly, when you fail, learn from those mistakes, but don't let it erode your self-worth. So both are important. That is what samatvam is all about. In samatvam, when you do something good, when you succeed, it's okay. It's okay to feel good. It's okay to celebrate. But don't let that become an ego booster, that suddenly you are now somehow, a great person. You shouldn't get into that pitfall. And if something doesn't work out, if you fail, it's okay. Just learn the lesson, but don't call yourself a failure. You see, Krishna said, don't harm yourself also. So don't say, I am a failure. That's a very, very destructive way of looking at things. That's the practical application. Okay? And controlling the mind, refining the intellect, we just spoke. That is another very strong key takeaway. Catch your mind. Use your intellect to practice and, gain more of this jnana, this divine knowledge, and train your mind. The more you train the mind, the more easier it becomes to keep it on track. The more free rein you give to the mind, the more wild it becomes. Then it is very hard to then again bring it back. No, you don't want to do that. Somebody said, some Guruji, I don't remember who, it was many years ago, it just suddenly remembered. He gave the example of fire. He said, let us say there is a fire and your job is to put out that fire. Will you say, I will put out a little bit of the fire and then I will go take a break. I will, maybe swim in the water for some time. Then I'll come back and put out the rest of the fire. Because what has happened? You have put out the fire, but if you stop, in no time that fire will again catch up, and it's a losing battle. If you have to really have victory over fire, you have to put out the entire fire. Even if a small flame is left unchecked, it is going to become a big fire again quickly. Just like that, the mind has to completely be brought. But for that, you have to consistently practice. Consistency. Okay. And then discrimination, we already spoke. Viveka, the importance. In other words, try to spend more time on what is really important in the grand scheme of things. We all have to survive. We all have to survive in the material world. So whatever is required, do that. But beyond that, try to maximize your time in these things that truly matter. And then question your desires. All of us have so many desires. Question them. Question if those desires are aligning us with our higher purpose, or are they taking us away from the higher purpose. It's a very simple exercise, right? Ahimsa is another practical takeaway we have already discussed. I think everybody understands that. The eighth takeaway, I would say, is accepting the cycles of life. Birth is celebrated, whereas death is feared. I would say neither of that is required. Birth is as natural a process as death. So we have to just understand and accept that cycle. Anything that comes has to go. Anything that rises has to fall. Anything that is born has to die. It's a very natural cycle. We need to be very mindful of this. So the key message is neither be too attached nor be in the mode of fear. And that is possible if we can just internalize that this is the cycle of nature. The ninth takeaway, I would say, seeking liberation through Jnana, because that is Krishna's teaching basically. The 10th, living with awareness and gratitude. Why? Because everything is an outcome of Purusha and Prakriti. Everything. So that should keep us in that mindset of thankfulness, gratitude, always. So when you end the day, I think a couple of you have this habit, and I would encourage you to keep it up. At the end of the day, before sleeping, take it as look at me as a well-wisher. This is not like I'm lecturing you or anything. But if you really want to see transformation in your life with minimal effort, this is probably the best thing you can do. Is every day before falling asleep, think about whatever you can be thankful for, whatever you can be grateful for. Very simple exercise. And I'm not exaggerating. This can be the most transformative exercise that you will do in your lives. That will shift your energies completely. Within a month, your friends and your relatives will themselves point out and say, you are looking different. You are behaving different. That is how powerful it is. And if you want to take it to the next level, write it down. Before sleeping, that should be the last thing you do every day before sleeping, is actually write a few things down that you are grateful for and see how it impacts you. Vairagya will automatically come. Compassion will automatically come. Devotion will automatically come. You will gravitate towards that which is the truth, and you will gravitate towards the Supreme. It will not happen overnight, but it will definitely happen gradually. It is guaranteed. Okay, so these are the kind of takeaways I had in my mind. So if you think there are more takeaways, I'll be more than happy to hear from you. Please share it in the group whenever you get time. So with that, I will stop talking. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. Sulataji, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Guruji. Now, with all this chapter, like we understood how Prakriti, we tried to understand the components of Prakriti, how the interplay happens and all those things. So the emphasis of Ananya Chintan, as you had always inculcated, told us, like when the soul, now we understand the distinction also, like the soul and the body. So when the soul leaves the body, as previously you had explained in 5th chapter, Prakriti takes over the control. So if we put everything for the last minute, it's like a state of helplessness, avasa. Prakriti will take over the control and we will not have any say in that. So Ananya Chintan is so very important that if we have to have this Antakali,
It's so beautiful. I mean, excellent. Thank you so much, Sulataji. She just reminded us of such a powerful concept that we learned. So this whole, we talk about discernment, we talk about choosing Shreya over Preya, we talk about directing the mind, but all of this is possible as long as we are in this body. Because those are the instruments. It is like, having a radio or a television where you are able to tune to whatever channel you think is pleasant, or whatever channel you think is the right information that is required, you see. But if there is no TV, if there is no radio, there is no tuning possible. Correct? Just like that, all this discernment, all this free will, all of this, it all happens only as long as we have a body. Once the soul leaves the body, then it is entirely under control of Prakriti. Then based on whichever guna was active in us, then the Prakriti, whatever it decides is what's going to happen. We will be helpless. Like Sulataji rightly said, avasam, that was the word used by Krishna at that time, helpless. So what is the lesson? Make the most of this body when you have it. Don't postpone, don't actually prioritize. Give it absolute priority and say that it is very important, because Antakale is something that nobody can predict. Our Antakali can happen tonight. It can happen tomorrow. It can happen in 50 years. We don't know. It's not in our control. So see, I don't know, maybe Rajesh ji may know this, in companies like Amazon or Microsoft, especially when it comes to security, we have this concept called as assume breach. In other words, we go with this assumption that, something bad is going to happen. The assumption that somebody is trying to take down our service. The assumption is, so what that means is you are always alert. You always have the right checks and balances in place. See, just like that, assume Antakale. Assume it is going to come very quickly. So if Krishna came and told you that your Antakale is going to come tomorrow, how will you live today? What will be your regrets? What would be, you think about that. And that will be your driving force. And then live as if Antakale can come any moment, so that you don't have to be helpless once the soul leaves the body, and Prakriti can be more, kind to you at that time. That is the whole story. So thank you, Sulataji. Really appreciate that. Did everything else make sense? Anybody had anything else to add? I hope this chapter proves helpful to all of you. And as I said again, please share your own thoughts and your own lessons that you think you are learning or taking away. And if you think there are any parts that I can explain better, I would like to hear that also. As I said, I've tried not to just go too technical, and at the same time, I've tried not to be oversimplistic. I'm trying to find a balance, but you have to help me find that balance. Okay, so Hare Krishna. Next week we will try to have a revision again, and then we can try to, even if we get time, we can even introduce the next chapter. So that's what's on my mind. Okay, Hare Krishna. See you, all of you, in the next session.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Guruji.
Thank you, Sulataji, for reiterating those concepts again and again. It's beautiful. Thank you, Guruji.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.